Oh, thank you so much for clapping when the people told you to clap. Welcome to Build Week and Watch. This is an entertainment show about TV and movies that airs in the midst of an increasingly grim political, moral, and constitutional crisis that also happens to impede our country's ability to work on the global crisis soon to destroy us all. Cool, right? I'm Ricky Camilleri, and with me today are Yahoo Entertainment's Gwynne, Watkins, and Ethan Alter. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, guys. Good to see you.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
How are you?
Doing just fine.
Okay, first up, the 11th Halloween movie is hitting theaters today. Thankfully, John Carpenter has a little to do with the soundtrack on this one, and that is the best thing I can say about it. Here's a quick look at the trailer.
The bus crashed.
Michael Myers escaped. He returned to Haddonfield, his home.
I need to protect my family.
You have no security system, Karen.
Mom, you need help.
Evil is real.
There's a reason we're supposed to be afraid of the snake.
This movie's gonna make bank.
Yes.
Like more than, it's gonna make more money than I think any Halloween movie, maybe all of them combined.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say it's going to make a killing? Isn't that there? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
I should have gone straight for the pun. Why did I set it up for you to do? I really like the sort of reworking of the score. I know that I already said that. I've always loved John Carpenter's movies and the scores that he uses. And there's some really cool moments where he's reworking the original Halloween score and adding this like heavy synth into it. And I loved that aspect of it. I had some issues with the movie itself. To me, it feels like just another Halloween sequel. I'm not sure what is so creative or original about this. It just feels like The Curse of Michael Myers or another sort of standard. He gets out of the mental hospital and he chases down some teens and then they kill him. Like that's kind of the same thing we've seen so many times. Right.
Yeah, my feeling was there's nothing new here. I mean, there's this thing they almost do where there's this story about, Jamie Lee Curtis is back as her original character, and she had a daughter who was taken away from her because she kept teaching her how to shoot guns. So there's this interesting theme, and then there's a granddaughter of women passing on their trauma to their daughters and their granddaughters, which could be really cool and timely, but they don't do anything with it till the last 5 minutes. They just, because they have to introduce so many people to kill. And there's so much in this movie that references the original,
and
which
other
is
movies
cool.
as well. There's references to Texas Chainsaw Massacre throughout it as well that at a certain point, it's fun to watch the references, but I started hitting a wall with them. And Texas Chainsaw is one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite horror movie. And when they started referencing that, I kind of was like, I get it. You've seen horror movies. That's fine. Make a good one.
Well, it's interesting because I think you go back and watch the original Halloween now, and it's so unlike where the genre went later on, the slasher genre specifically. I mean, that's what kicked off the slasher genre, was that movie. But so I think this new one is sort of working not only as a direct sequel to that first one, but also as a comment on where slasher is now, where it went over the years. And I do think it's odd that there's enough, there are bigger kill set pieces in this movie, which is definitely not in the original Carpenter. There's a whole bathroom sequence that we saw in that clip there that is not something Carpenter would have done, because he, at least at that time, because he was not about sort of making big, playing up the kills or playing into the sort of stalk and kill aspect of the later slasher movies. So it's interesting and a little bit weird to sort of see Halloween, the new one, try to serve two masters that way. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's not as successful, certainly, as the first one.
I think that goes back to something that you just said as well, which is that what is most interesting about the movie, which is the storyline about these three women, doesn't really have any satisfying moments until the last act of the movie, which comes very late into the film. And everything before that really does feel like a standard run-of-the-mill slasher film.
Well, they just keep introducing people to kill off. And every time they introduce them, there's a new storyline, and then they die, and that story ends, and then somebody else comes in. And, at the beginning of the movie, they have these teenagers talking, and they're like, Michael Myers killed 5 people in 1978. And you're like, oh, 5. That is not a lot for a horror movie. How bold would it have been if he'd only killed 5 people in this movie? But got you to really invest in those 5 people.
But in this, he kills so
many
people, and you're unsure why. That's the other thing. There's no effect on a lot of the deaths because it's I don't know who that person is. I don't know why you're killing this person in front. It's not interesting to see you kill this stranger.
Right.
There's nothing scary about that. And there's even there's a big shot in the middle of the movie that is this beautifully choreographed one shot that goes from one street to another street and one house out of another house into a window and in the back, and it's very cool. But there's something so unmotivated about so much of the film that even when I was watching that shot, most of the time I would be very impressed by something like that. I found myself going, good job.
Yeah.
You did it. Kind of like the
Yeah.
homages to other horror movies. Great. You did it.
Yeah. It's also, I think, it's missing. Not to keep harping on the original, but you watch that now, and what still holds up about it is sort of the sweatiness that comes with 70s cinema. There's just something sweaty about the film stock. You can sort of feel it pouring off the screen. And this one is almost too pristine. And moments like that are very pristine. They're very expertly choreographed, but they're not unnerving. And that's what the original does. Again, because it is so elemental and basic and grainy and grimy. You feel slightly dirty watching it, but that adds to the horror aspect, I think, for sure.
That is not to say that if you're going to see this tonight, you're not going to be satisfied. Like, these are three people.
It's a Halloween movie.
It's a Halloween movie.
You're going to see a Halloween movie, you get a Halloween movie.
Yeah,
So.
100%. These are three people who I think probably revere the original Halloween in like a way that most people don't, and have like studied it, and were just like a little let down that this thing that got so much hype coming out of the Toronto Film Festival did not really live up to anything beyond. As you said, you're going to see a Halloween movie.
And what's sort of sad too is thinking because to your point about where it ends with in terms of trauma and these characters, it actually brings the series to an effective end. Like I think the end of this movie sort of is a closed book. You can close the book on Michael Myers, except they won't, because this movie is going to make all the money in the world, and that means the number two is another number two. I think we'll be on the third number two at this point. Is going to come out, and it's going to sort of negate what this is about ultimately, which is sort of resolving this for Laurie. And I think that's unfortunate.
You just said another number two, which would be the third number two, right?
Exactly.
Because of the Rob Zombie.
Yep.
I will say, as much as I don't particularly like Rob Zombie as a filmmaker, I don't like his dialogue. I get very frustrated by whenever a writer thinks that what they're writing is that clever. I get very frustrated. But Halloween 2, his Halloween 2 is scarier than any of the other sequels of Halloween. It is brutal, it is vicious, and it had a take on murder in horror movies that I don't think I've ever seen in most horror movies. And by a take, I mean more stabbings and sound effects. But I found it brutal and kind of scary, like tougher to watch than most horror movie sequels.
Yeah.
I'd recommend that over this, personally speaking. All right. We have a clip of Jamie Lee Curtis talking with the director. This clip is not going to work after our conversation, guys. We're just going to move on to the next
We love her, though.
Yeah, she's great in the
We love
movie. We
Jamie
should
Lee
say.
Curtis.
She's really great
she's good in the movie.
But the clip was her talking about how much she loves the director, who I love as well when he does comedy. Okay, so let's move on to the next movie. Known for her blockbuster comedies, Melissa McCarthy shows a refreshingly different side of her acting chops in Can You Ever Forgive Me? In it, McCarthy plays Lee Israel, a former popular author down on her luck who turns to forging famous letters to make ends meet. It's a great movie. Let's take a look.
People are on alert. Your name's been put on a list.
On a list. They're literary treasures, one of a kind. It's my writing.
You're impersonating other people. Nobody's buying Lee Israel letters.
There have been some forgeries going around.
Do you think it's real?
Looks that way.
Good.
You're stealing from me?
Come on.
Get out of my house!
It's just supposed to be something more than this.
So good.
Let's not forget Melissa McCarthy. She's amazing in this. She's so good. But Richard E. Grant, let's get him an Oscar.
Yeah.
Let's get him an Oscar.
I think they both deserve Oscars for this film. It's interesting that that little trailer we just watched made it really look like a thriller with them.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a thriller.
Yeah.
It's a great movie, though.
Yeah.
It's in the same way that I think Spotlight was made to be a thriller in a lot of ways. And when you actually sit down to watch Spotlight, it's actually just sort of like a quiet take on this thing that happened and these people, and it tells the story. This felt to me kind of like that. There's so much hype and so much buzz coming out of it, and the first time you sit down to watch it, it's like a very understated movie that it almost shouldn't have any hyper buzz, so you can have your own experience with how subtle and just well made the movies is. There's no frills about it,
Yeah, exactly. I think if you have a fetish for sort of old visions of New York that don't exist anymore, this one recreates.
The best in recent time.
This one recreates just early '90s New York, late '80s, early '90s New York, when there were bookstores in every corner. You could wander in and sell rare antiques to people just off the street. And I feel like I didn't get to experience that version of New York, so I really appreciate the care that was taken in recreating it here. It feels very authentic to that time.
And nobody in this movie looks like they're in a movie. Which is actually surprisingly rare, that people in movies look and feel as normal as these people. They feel like people you would bump into in a bar But it's a terrific movie. Melissa McCarthy's never had a role anything like this before. It's kind of a quiet, contained performance. She's this curmudgeon. She's really unlikable. And then by the end of the movie, you're totally with her. But she hasn't become likable. And that's one thing I love about the movie. They don't change her particularly. You just get to understand who she is and why she did what she did.
Right. There's something about the movie, and it may just be the period of time that the movie's set, but then also how focused and no frills it is, reminds me of Sidney Lumet. And I think of like the Q&A era of Sidney Lumet, or the early 90s Sidney Lumet, just because you're getting this vision of New York. The cars look like the cars from a Sidney Lumet movie, but also just the way that it tells the story. It's never more than what the story is. There's never a filmmaker trying to show off. There's never a writer trying to show off. The actors aren't trying to show off. It's all just sort of like a strike right down the middle, and it works perfectly. But let's talk about Richard E. Grant for a minute. Withnail, Withnell's going to win an Oscar this year, right?
Yeah, I think he's definitely got a shot. And Richard E. Grant has been in everything. I don't think it's a name people know, but as soon as you look at him, you're like, that's the guy from, he's Withnail and I was his first film that has a big following, but then he was on Game of Thrones, he was on Downton Abbey, he's on Doctor Who, he's everywhere.
I can kind of see the sort of, it's Richard E. Grant's turn.
Yes.
Conversation. And that happens often, right? Like that's what happened with Sam Rockwell. A great performance, but people were like, oh, it's Sam Rockwell's turn. Whatever that means. I think we can say it's Richard E. Grant's turn.
He's one of those like reliable character actors. He's great in everything. He's amazing in this movie. And he's also funny. Like they're both actually pretty funny in this movie.
Right.
Just in a very different way than Melissa McCarthy is usually funny.
Yeah.
Were either of you surprised at Melissa McCarthy being able to pull a performance like this off?
I wouldn't say so. I always feel like she, just her range is underrated. She's usually tapped to do one thing ever since Bridesmaids. But before Bridesmaids, she had quite she hadn't settled into that role yet. And I think you go back and look at Gilmore Girls. She played a range of emotions as Sookie on that show. Some of her earlier film work as well. I think it was always there. It's just a question of when someone would see it and decide to use it. And I think Marielle Heller, the director of this one, finally said this is the time to let you showcase it in a starring role.
Yeah, she goes so deep into her characters always, and it's the same with this one, and it's cool to see her going deep into a character who's as realistic as this one is.
We've got a clip of her talking about something in the movie that we haven't touched upon yet, so let's take a look at that clip.
If a male character has a husband and it's not on topic, I always think you show the world that you want people who maybe don't get the chance to be around it. They can start to realize, like, oh, the world won't explode. It's fine. You have to start showing the real world. Thanks. And I think when filmmakers do that, and I think Marielle handled it beautifully in this, that they showed the world and everyone just watches. It's a part of what we all deal with. So
I feel like that's slightly out of context. What she's talking about there is the LGBTQ representation in the film, and how the film, all of its central characters are queer. Right. And that is something, and they're also queer at a time in the early 90s when their stories are normally told with far greater dramatics. And even while there is sort of a tragic element to one of the characters' parts, that's not the center of his story. Right. And that's not the center of Melissa McCarthy's story, the center of Dolly Wells' story. And it's kind of refreshing to watch a movie at this point that can tell an LGBTQ story without making it specifically only tragic, or only about coming out, or only about being gay or lesbian. It's about all the other things in their life, and that's just a part of their lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we'll move on from there.
You're right.
Thanks.
Yes.
Next up, thank you. I am. It's my show. No, I'm just
no need to forgive you.
One of my favorite movies of the year is also actor Paul Dano's directorial debut. It's adapted from the Richard Ford novel. Jake Gyllenhaal and Carey Mulligan star in it as well. It's called Wildlife. It follows a husband and wife, both losing their sense of purpose, and their son who bears witness to their crumbling marriage. It's sad, it's bleak, it's austere, and it's exactly my kind of thing. Cue the trailer.
I think your father has a woman out here.
He wouldn't do that.
No? Why do you think men do things? They either go crazy or it's a woman.
I don't think that's true.
People are drawn to things they shouldn't be. I used to dress like this all the time when I was younger. It's probably nice to know your parents were once not your parents.
So this movie, it started, and within 5 minutes, my brain went, "You love this," and it never let me down. There's something about the world, the way that he uses his camera, and Carey Mulligan's performance that I just couldn't get enough of. I could have watched this movie for 4 or 5 hours, and I think it's only an hour and 40 minutes long. But I really love this movie. This is one of the few movies this year that I genuinely loved, and will probably watch multiple times after.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really solid directorial debut from Paul Dano, co-written with Zoe Kazan, and Carey Mulligan. Just wow. Jake Gyllenhaal is very good in it too. But we haven't really seen her since In Education really have a role that she could kind of seize like this. And I was not expecting this from her.
There are moments in the movie where she puts forth a range of emotion just by the looks on her face within 15 to 20 seconds of a shot. The camera sits on her and you can read everything, all of the conflicts that are going on inside of her brain in those moments. And it's ugly and it's beautiful and it's heartbreaking, and she somehow pulls all of those things out in different shots in the film.
That's fair. I'm a little more measured in my
Get the
feeling.
hell off
I know.
my stage.
I'll leave right now for this feeling than you perhaps. But I do love Carey Mulligan, and I think it is a great performance from her. I just felt she's so good in it that I felt the conceit of the movie, which is that her son is the sort of point of view character of the film, and the film very much takes place from his perspective. And I found that frustrating after a little while, especially in the second act when Mulligan's character starts to really transform in some really interesting ways. And I wanted to be there with Mulligan while that was happening. And I felt like the conceit of the movie, which is probably also the conceit of the book that Richard Ford wrote, distanced me from that. And I found myself a little frustrated with that. So that's what has been holding me back from really loving the movie, as well directed and well made as it is. I think there's just something fundamental about the conceit that I found frustrating. So
yeah, I mean, outside of her performance and that, I will also say, when we say well made, the cinematography and the production design is stunning. I haven't really seen a movie, especially on what I think the budget on this probably was, really have this much of a scope in such a small story, and it has a wonderfully epic scope about it, and that has to do with the town and the design of the film.
Yeah, I'm such a sucker for movies that are set in an era that actually feel like they're from that era.
Yeah.
I think since Carol, this is probably the strongest example of that.
Absolutely.
I
50s
think movie that feels like it's set in the 50s.
I think there you could also use Carol as a kind of a reference for this as well. Not just the look, but the tone and the way that it goes about telling its story. Yeah. I love this film. I have nothing else to say about it. You guys?
Well,
you want to talk more? You want to talk more shit about
why it's terrible? Measured is okay. No, I mean, I think again, there's a lot to appreciate. I think it's just that fundamental feeling of distance. And to the Carol point, I mean, that was a movie where we lived with Cate Blanchett, we lived with Rooney Mara, and I think there's a step back that this movie takes, and it takes itself a little too literally in the fact that the kid turns out to be a photographer. So again, I think they're thinking with that in mind, and I think it's a case where maybe the metaphor got a little too literal and detracted from the experience a little bit for me. But then because he's a photographer, you get some amazing shots, and they really do think about it like a photograph, and it looks like every image is composed like an image from the 50s.
It's so interesting because the final moment of the film, which I could feel while I was watching, I can see some people not liking this or being turned off by this. So much of the movie had worked for me that I was totally on board with that.
That last shot is
that final shot.
Sure, I agree.
All right, let's move on to what's next. Also out in theaters this weekend is What They Had, from first-time writer-director Elizabeth Chomko. In it, Hilary Swank, Michael Shannon, Robert Forster, and Blythe Danner play a family struggling to deal with Danner's character's escalating dementia. It's similar to how our entire country is being forced to deal with our president and his dying brain. Take a quick look.
You got any idea what I got going on here? I get to pick up Mom and Pop's dry cleaning, take them to church.
Grandma drank the holy water.
Well, at least she's hydrated.
I don't know what's the matter with me.
And I'm not putting your mother in a nursing home.
You know, everyone thinks being alone is so bad. You know, it's lonely. Looking over at the man that you've been married to for the last 20 years and thinking he must be feeling the same way I am.
Love is commitment.
I don't have what you have.
This is a movie with its heart in the right place.
Yep. You're right.
That's all I got.
So parts of this movie really resonated with me, and there was a lot. It's a family drama about dealing with dementia, a parent who has dementia. In this case, it's the mom, played by Blythe Danner, and it's all the stuff that wasn't about that, really, I didn't care about. I didn't care about the people's marriages or anything like that. But
the Josh Lucas part had me rolling on the ground laughing. He was so one-dimensional and how they described him that when he showed up, and I was like, you should have never had him show up because the description was enough. Now he's just doing that. And it was really funny. He's Hilary Swank's husband who's not in the picture because she's in Chicago with her family. He's back in LA. And he's described as this very shallow man who only cares about the things that he owns and keeping everything kind of on balance. And then we meet him and he's like essentially like, do you like the new vase I bought you? How about the bedspread? Are you going to go to work tomorrow? And like he's given nothing else to do but that one direction. And it was very, very, it was kind of the funniest performance in the movie for me.
So we could lose that part. But the stuff about dealing with dementia and you're watching your parents become people you have to take care of, I thought that was actually really moving. And something I don't, see in a lot of movies that all of us are going to have to deal with and we're all in denial about it all the time. And I thought it was watching the director really work her way through that, especially Michael Shannon is really terrific. It's the son trying to come to grips with it. I thought all that stuff that stuck with me.
Yeah. I thought the stuff with Blythe Danner and Robert Forster, there's a great scene with Presence that actually got me. I mean, as much as I can probably say some criticisms of this film, that I did cry at certain moments, but it's hard not to cry when you're talking about dementia and you're talking about family members dying.
And I do feel like the writer-director, I think it's her first film. I believe this is based semi-autobiographical, at least. I do think she's using it to work through some issues, and in a nice way, and in a way that again gets to an authentic recreation of the experience, I guess you could say, and the different perspectives of what happens when when you have to make these decisions for your parents when they can't make them for themselves.
So one thing that we're not talking about yet is that Hilary Swank is the star of the movie. Right. 2-time Oscar-winning actress.
2-time.
Hilary Swank. In the 2 times that she won, amazing performances. Amazing performances. I watched this and I thought I was watching an alien who didn't know how to tap into human emotions. I kept thinking, why do you think this person would do that in this moment? And why is your line reading like that? That's not how humans talk or behave. And I started to think like, oh, she's actually maybe one of our most gifted character actresses who's been boosted to like A-list star and has to take on these kind of roles that are the gateway for the entire story. And maybe that's not her and maybe that's not what she's suited to.
Right.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to see if for example, Michael Shannon was the gateway and she was a sort of the ne'er-do-well sibling who owned a bar. Like that would have been an interesting flip because maybe that would have played to her strengths a little more. I think she
can carry a movie as he can carry the movie as a weirdo character actor, or he can carry it as just the sort of average Joe lead. Right. I think as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think I do give her credit for there are a lot of scenes, especially towards the end of the movie, where I think she really delivers on what the material asks and rise above it. I think early on, especially because she is our point of view character here, she doesn't get to have as many interesting wrinkles as everyone else does, and that can be a little. I think you can sort of feel her frustration maybe in that a little bit.
Let's move on to our next one. Written and directed by Jonah Hill, A24's mid-90s, focuses on a teenager with a troubled life at home who ends up finding comfort and friendship in a rowdy skating crew. Check it out.
This is awesome. I've never been in a car without someone's mom or dad before.
You're so cute. You're like at the age before guys become dicks.
Oh, fuck! Yo, what the fuck?
Oh, shit.
You think you're pretty cool. With your ghetto-ass friends.
You good?
You think you're tough and shit. You're just a little fucking kid.
A lot of the time, we feel like our lives are the worst. But I think if you looked at anybody else's closet, you wouldn't trade your shit for their shit.
I don't know, man.
Lucas Hedges saying ghetto-ass friends is almost reason enough to see this movie.
That's the only reason you like this movie.
I love Lucas Hedges in this movie. I think I've gotten very used to seeing him do a kind of movie performance, a film performance. This is unlike what I've seen him do before. I really liked watching him in this a lot. I also loved all the Street Fighter II references. So if you have a Street Fighter II fetish as I do, Blanca all the way, you will appreciate the recreations of that era of video gaming and culture in general.
This movie just seems like kids light to me, and I really love kids. It's a movie that I watched when I was way too young to see and watched a lot, and it really informed, I think, my brain and how it works. Not in the way that theirs works that way, in a different way. But I don't want to see someone recreate that period of time without being authentic, and I don't want to see someone recreate that behavior without being authentic, because what works so well about Kids is that it is totally authentic, and in its authenticity, it's an indictment of a certain type of behavior and a certain type of privilege. And it doesn't seem to me that mid-90s is actually working on that level, and is much more just like a celebration of like a 1995. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, I would say I think Kids is an obvious reference point. I do think, I mean, he was asked that in Toronto where the movie screened, and he tried to sort of acknowledge it quickly and move on. Because I do think Kids, while the sort of milieu is kind of the same, this is ultimately, it's trying to be more about a brother relationship. It's definitely about, and I think with no direct knowledge of this, it does feel like Jonah Hill is working through some of his own issues in terms of loss of his own brother in the way he frames the Lucas Hedges character and his younger brother. So I think it's much more about what happens when the person you've looked up to all your life just suddenly decides you're not cool anymore, moves on. Where do you go next? And in this case, he goes to this group of skaters who accept him, and suddenly it becomes more about that push. Who should influence his life, and what's the proper influence to come? Whereas Kids was a little bit different in that regard. It wasn't really much about the brother relationships amongst themselves.
Now, this is being called a straight out of the box masterpiece by some. Is that true?
No, that is definitely not true. That sounds like a post-festival hyperbole. But it is a good calling card film. I mean, I would be interested to see what Hill decides to do next after this, because I think he does have a certain eye. I think he does. I like that he used so many non-professional actors in this one, especially for the main roles.
And they look like they're the ages of their characters too.
Right, which is a big deal. So I think it's definitely, and I'll use this to quickly do a plug for a great movie called Skate Kitchen, which also came out, and that was a movie about sort of set in contemporary New York about modern day girl skaters, which I think is a better movie overall and shows us a group that we haven't seen on screen before. This one we've seen this group before, but I think they make good companion pieces. I would sort of recommend watching them on a double bill, perhaps, when they're both on streaming or on cable.
Right. And you say that Skate Kitchen is a better movie than mid-90s.
Right.
See, this is kind of my problem with mid-90s. It's like, why is mid-90s getting all of the love, getting the festival attention, getting the publicity, and everybody is going to see it? I don't think it's just because it's about Jonah Hill. I think it's because it's about boys and it's about men, and we're still kind of threatened as a culture by women being better at a lot of sports or a lot of activities that we normally prescribe to boys and men.
But also very blatant 90s nostalgia.
Yeah,
I mean, I haven't seen the film,
thing,
but like we're talking about Kids. Kids was made in the 90s.
Right.
And we haven't really seen, this is like the wave moving in of movies that recreate the 90s. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from here.
Yeah, I mean,
Adam Sandler should remake The Wedding Singer, but do it for the 90s.
Exactly.
And have like a new wedding singer.
It's true. I mean, the soundtrack of this alone
Grunge Wedding Singer.
It gets so many just memories flowing. The hip hop and everything you heard on the soundtrack is sort of perfect of the era. And so I think so many of the people who are covering movies now grew up in that era, so they do love seeing that sort of themselves represented. Whether they needed to see themselves represented is something else again. But it is there, and
it's so sad to think of movie critics in a theater going, "Hey, I liked that." It's not your job.
I was also a white boy in the 90s.
Exactly right. Listening to.
I also played Street Fighter too.
I did again. Ryu and Blanca, good combination. But
okay, let's move on. This Tuesday, America's most controversial family, The Connors, came back to ABC, and without Roseanne because she apparently OD'd the character. How do we feel about this, guys?
I loved it.
Really?
Loved it. Yes, did not expect to. I thought they handled the death really well. I thought they had just a really nice balance. Roseanne was always one of the better comedies at handling that very special episode kind of thing with the comedy. I didn't feel like it was gimmicky at all. And I was just enjoying, I couldn't watch Roseanne with Roseanne because I felt so weird about all the stuff she was tweeting, and it just made me feel icky. And it was kind of like welcoming me back into the family.
Side note or tangent, I went and saw a taping of the Roseanne revival, like one of the episodes, and I knew that she was tricky, if you would say, based off of her tweets and her opinions, and I was kind of willing to put it aside because I loved the original series so much. I grew up with it. I thought it was the only show on television that I felt like I saw my family in, and in terms of just the cynicism and how they approached problems and made fun of each other, and everything was about the insult in a lot of ways. And watching the taping, I was like, this is going to be bad. And it was because they were all very special episodes. Like they did an 8 or 10 episode run.
Right.
And if you watch, it was like, this one's about the opiate epidemic. This one is about labor. This one's about immigration. This one's about this. And each one of them felt like they didn't want to take a side because they had Roseanne there, but then they also had all these writers who were most likely like fairly left-leaning. Right. So they were always trying to find this middle ground and cover the issues, and nothing ever felt substantial enough. But it's interesting to hear that this is better without her.
It's nice to see a showcase too, just for Laurie Metcalf and John Goodman, who are
absolutely.
just
Roseanne means more of them.
Right, exactly, and they're terrific just as performers. They're very good in the show. I do think the first episode suffers from the Where's Poochie effect of the fact that everyone has to talk about Roseanne, even though she's not on it. So I think going forward, it'll be interesting to see how they move past her, literally not have to make her a subject in every episode.
I will say when I saw it live, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when I saw it live, Laurie Metcalf and John Goodman consistently made the scene. You could see them make the scenes better when they were there with Roseanne, because like all Roseanne can really do is her laugh, and it is incredibly infectious. Like when you are watching her live, that laugh is very infectious. But you would watch Laurie Metcalf and John Goodman like know how to make her better in scenes and know how to give her give her things to react to, because otherwise she would just be like, I don't know. Like that was all she would do. Let's move over to Netflix. Today the 3rd season of Marvel's Daredevil is out. That's all I got to say about it. Here's the trailer.
He's claiming to have changed, but they don't know him like I do.
The last time that we spoke, you threatened me.
That is something that I cannot forgive.
I'll stop him for good this time.
There's only one way to stop me, but you're not going to do it.
You sure about that?
Just be careful that you don't become the monster.
I have not seen this show since the 1st season, which I found very long and very plotting and quite boring. How's it holding up?
Well, I'll throw out 3 things just to know about this one. That's interesting. One, it's loosely based on the storyline Born Again from the comics, which is one of the best Daredevil storylines, probably one of the best comic book storylines ever written, and they do their own version of it. So fans who know that storyline, it'll be fun to see them see it for the first time. They've wanted to see it adapted for a while. Also, as the trailer showed, there's a lot more D'Onofrio in this season. A lot Bullseye's introduced, and the villains.
Who plays Bullseye?
It's an actor who I don't know, unfortunately. He surprised me anyway. I think he is. I'm not sure what his past credits were, but he's very good, and it shows that the villains are more interesting than the hero in this case, as is often the case with a lot of superhero stuff. And then just the third thing in episode 4, if you make it that far, they do another one of their signature hallway battles. The one take.
We were just kind of seeing a little bit.
You sort of saw that here,
yeah.
But the full thing is about 10 minutes long. It's in the middle of a prison riot, and it just follows him down these prison hallways as everything's going to shit around him, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, just as a technical achievement, that's really impressive, and again, reason enough to stick around for at least through episode 4.
Yeah, the fight sequences in Daredevil are really good. I think they're one of the strongest things about the show. This is not my favorite Marvel series. I still think it's not as good as Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. It doesn't keep my attention as much. I just can't. I'm just not that invested in the character, and I love the comics, so maybe that's part of it, is my preconceptions. But it does have that Netflix bloat where you're like, this, that episode could have been shorter. You could probably do this all in 10. Even just from the first couple episodes, you get that. But I watched a few of them, and I was sucked in. I didn't watch the second season at all, and you can really pick up from this season. I didn't feel like I was missing any beats.
Did you feel like the second season of Jessica Jones suffered from the bloat?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so did I. And I feel like Luke Cage does too, but there's something about the style of Luke Cage that consistently saves it a little bit. Like even when it's kind of, the stories are bloated to fit it out, you're kind of like, but I do like Wu-Tang.
Right.
So like, it's okay by me.
Funnily enough, Iron Fist was only 10 episodes this season, so in a way that made that one of the stronger second seasons they've done, because it was not as bloated as some of the other ones have been.
It was pretty easy for them to do a strong second season of Iron Fist.
When your first season is like down here in the basement, anything is going to be like slightly better, I think. But
let's move on to the next Netflix release. It's the second part of the popular docuseries Making a Murderer, and it will see defense attorney Kathleen Zeller, known for her work in overturning wrongful convictions, look to prove Stephen Avery's innocence after he was found guilty by Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, for the murder of Teresa Halbach. Let's take a look.
prosecution's case was Teresa never left the property, but the last call pings off a cell phone tower miles away from the Avery property.
70 to 80% of people who are murdered by someone they know. Each of those individuals have to be looked at as suspects.
There's a lot based on that bullet.
This is critical. There's an abundance of evidence. This could flip the whole case.
So I hate to have this feeling with the thing that started it all, really, but I'm starting to get a little grossed out by our true crime fetish.
Yeah.
And I should definitely reserve that feeling and reaction for like Dateline and the things that really exploit people and you know, tell stories in the in the lowest common denominator way. But there is something about Netflix having both Making a Murderer and American Vandal
and The Staircase.
And The Staircase that makes me so uncomfortable that like, so you have this docuseries that's literally about life or death for a certain group of people, and you host the series that makes fun of this whole thing. Like, so what does it actually mean to make this series at this point?
Right.
What does true crime series mean? Except for the fact that we're just taking real human lives with real consequences and turning them into story time for TV viewers. Like that starting to make me slightly uncomfortable.
Right. I get
it. I think it's something we're starting to have to reconcile with because there's just been so much of it. And I admit I'm a little burned out on it because you see the same sequences over, even though they're real stories, you see the same like setups and sequences and reveals, and they are all starting to feel a little bit the same to me and a little bit morally questionable. But I did not watch the first season of this one. I tried to jump in with the second, and I do not recommend that. They do a little catch up, and I had been reading about the story in the news. I thought I was pretty well informed about it, but I was pretty lost.
Yeah. One of the things I'd say, I wanted them to sort of your point about where is the genre going now. I wanted this season to wrestle a little bit more with its role in what's happened to Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, and I feel like it touches on it, but definitely mostly in positive ways. Well, because this happened, Catherine Zellner is now working on their case, but I think there are slightly more insidious things that have happened. It's sort of hinted at. Stephen very briefly has sort of a trophy fiancée who very clearly got involved with him because she was hoping to be on the show, and so she is on the show at one point, and then very quickly gets off the show. But I think the filmmakers' role in their lives is something I don't think they really reckon with quite as much in this as I wish they had, because I think there is a lot to say about how having these cameras around both works and doesn't work in there.
Well, you know, it's unfortunate to have this conversation, especially about them, because the first season came from about, I think, 8 to 10 years of work.
Right.
You know, a long time of being with these people and filming them and putting this entire package together for the first season. And now we're kind of kicking out the second season. And there's just something about it. Watching this turn from something that was 10 years of work that meant so much to these people to another season of television versus what the first one meant is putting all of the other serious true crime things into a different context for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to, everything we talked about. What are your guys' top picks? What do we got? Ethan, go ahead.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to throw out actually a quick recommendation for something that we didn't get to talk about, which is a movie called The Guilty, which is Denmark's Oscar film. It's out this weekend. It's a really fun single room phone conversation. So if you enjoy those movies, it's movies like Phone Booth, Sorry, Wrong Number, going way back, and Locke, of course, Tom Hardy and Locke. It's in that vein. It's about 90 minutes, really trim. The lead actor is very good, and it's just really well paced. He basically is a police officer who gets a call about a possible kidnapping in progress, and we see that play out almost in real time as he tries to figure out what's going on. It's a nicely done piece. If you enjoy that kind of movie, it's a good version of that.
Can You Ever Forgive Me? I think everyone should see. I really liked The Conners and Wildlife. If that is your thing, it's going to be very much your thing.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Wildlife, and also Can You Ever Forgive Me? Which I really want to see again because there was so much hype coming out of the festivals about it that I think I was a little let down at first because expecting something much grander and not being able to just sort of sit with something that is small and really well done, which it is.
And just for a 10-minute watch, again, that Daredevil fight, it's awesome AF. So just spend 10 minutes, watch that, and if you don't watch the rest, that's fine.
That's all the time we have for this week at Weekend Watch. You now have a plethora of content to watch this weekend, and it's all thanks to us. You're very welcome. Many thanks to Gwynne and Ethan for joining me. And remember, just because it's getting colder outside doesn't mean the Earth isn't still dying. Bye!